Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Human Factors Cast. This is episode 238. We're recording this live on March 17th, 2022. I'm your host, Nick Roome, joined today by Mr. Barry Kirby.
Hey, good evening. How are you doing?
I am well. You, on the other hand, sound maybe not so well.
I've been better. I've been visited by COVID, and so I'm isolating and things. But because I'm isolating where we're recording, then it means I don't have to miss a show. So how cool is that?
How cool is that? The COVID fairy gave you a visit. Hey, we got a great show for you all tonight. We're going to be talking about how our minds distinguish between various social influences. And later, we're going to answer some questions from the community about how would you approach a product that's very broken, feeling overwhelmed potentially by new job, and the controversial opinion about whether or not paper prototyping is useful or not. But first, we got some programming notes for you. The next episode for 1202, the Human Factors podcast, is live. Barry, what is going on over on the 1202 podcast?
So on 1202 podcast on Monday, if I get myself sorted out, we'll be talking about musculoskeletal disorders and an app that's been brought to the UK anyway by Flex Health and Arco that is aiming to not only support musculoskeletal health in your day-to-day life, but actually if you've then got problems, it uses AI to bring you some physiotherapy. So been interesting to work out really what about musculoskeletal health and what we can actually do about it. So that'll go live on Monday UK time.
Super cool. I'm looking forward to that episode. In other news, we do have upcoming here on Friday, April 1st at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 Eastern. We do have the next HFES presidential town hall. I'll be sitting down with a slew of folks from HFES, talk about the latest and greatest from HFES and see what's going on. Our last one was pretty cool, so highly recommend that y'all come by and check it out. We'll also have it in the feed here. So if you miss it live, you can always listen to it here. All right, well, I think it's time that we get into this first part of the show. Yes, we know why you're here. It's Human Factors News. This is the part of the show all about bicycling. I don't know. Sometimes we pick these stories and you pick them. So it's going to be a great time. Barry, what's the story this week?
So this week is all about how our minds distinguish between various social influences. So when people change their opinion after they've received additional information from another person, this is an example of informational social influence. But when people revise their views because they want to be socially accepted, researchers refer to normative social influences. Previously, it was uncertain which neural mechanisms underlie these two different situations. Researchers characterized brain activities that occur if people have been socially influenced to change their opinion. The study showed that our brain solves social conflicts, that is, the differences of opinion, via the same neural machinery that it uses to solve its own internal subjective conflicts. A specific region of the brain takes the two factors into account, and that is how confident we are in our opinion and how polite we are obliged to be towards others. This study has shown that people tend to adjust their answers when their confidence was low, irrespective of whether they thought their partner was a human or not, and that'll become relevant when we do a bit more discussion. This information influence was controlled by an activity in the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex, or DACC, which is easier, of the brain, a region of the cerebral cortex. Test subjects also exhibited more conformity towards other opinions if they received their confirmation from their communication partner. This normative influence arose only when they believed that their partner was human, as did the correlation with DACC activity. Moreover, the normative influence was associated with stronger functional connections between the DACC and other social processing regions of the brain. This was not the case for the informational influence. So, Nick, were you influenced into believing the article?
Look, there's some really interesting, how do I put this? There's some really interesting nuances here that I think we could really dig into from a human factors perspective. And I think it really will challenge us to apply it, because I'm looking at your general impressions here. But mine, I love social science stuff, and I think social psych is a really cool topic. And this adds sort of the neuropsych onto it, and I think that's fascinating. I not strong feelings either way, but it's we're gonna try here, folks. Barry,
I
what are
mean,
your thoughts?
from my perspective, it's another one of these things that is like it's cool. Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. This whole social psych stuff is cool. The neuroscience behind it is really interesting because there is fundamentally there's still so much we don't know about the brain, how it functions, and all that sort of stuff. But in a practical sense, what does it give us new? What's it actually telling us? What is it that I can then go and take away and do something differently because of it? Um, Part of me thinks that there isn't anything there yet. Though this talk about where they talk about humans and non-humans giving supportive influences, which we'll come on to when we talk a bit more about the article itself, is interesting. But do we want to dig into a bit of, I guess, some of that psychology, that's social psych stuff that you like and you think is so cool?
Yeah.
Do you want to dig into some of them sort of concepts that we should be thinking about with this?
Yeah, I think, we're talking about this study here in terms of influencing others, and there are several different ways to think about social influence. This is going to take it back to like social psych 101, right? We're going to talk a lot about that stuff, but I think one thing for us as human factors practitioners is to really stretch and talk about how social influences can affect things like cognition, performance, decision making. And I think some of those key human factors principles are actually affected quite a bit by some of the other stuff going on socially. So let's open our minds, let's stretch our brain muscles and try to get this all linked up for y'all. So let's take a look at yeah, social influences from a social psychology perspective. So there's a couple different ways to think about this, right? There's let's start with like informative social influence, or this might be called social proof, and uh other people call it that. So this is when people feel the need to really be informed by accurate information, and when they don't have the confidence in their and especially when they don't have the confidence in their own knowledge. And so this is why, in a lot of cases, people go out and search news stories, and there's a whole bunch of issues with trust and social um, influence when it comes to misinformation and things on the news. So, I mean, this is a really big one. But basically, when they turn to others in hope of getting that correct information, when they accept that information, whether or not it's accurate, that person is subjected to social influence. So there's a whole conversation right now about how misinformation is handled from news sources and from those in your community. Someone could spout misinformation about vaccines or transmission of COVID or even COVID itself, and relevant to you, Barry. So, like, I there's a lot of different ways in which misinformation can manifest, and it's a form of social influence. Um, do you want to talk about normative social influence?
Yeah, so that second type of conformity is normative social influence, where people want to fit in amongst friends and colleagues. And fundamentally, they want to be liked and respected by other members of their social group. They value the opinions of other members and seek to maintain their standing within that group. Therefore, people will just adjust their own attitudes and behaviors to match the accepted norms of that group. And so, if that's your local community or your local family group or your local friendship group, this conformity with the majority may involve, the fashion trends that are popular amongst a group of friends, or adopting rituals of a religious group, or watching a particular TV show, or not wearing masks, or not getting vaccines. All them sort of things. If people within your circle do or not, either doing or not doing something, you will generally try and conform with that to stay within your normative group. Do you want to hit us up about social influence and conformity?
I do, but I want to pause on normative social influence because I think this has a lot of potential for human factors applications. So when you talk about fitting into a group, on the past, I feel like couple shows we've talked about what working in the workplace could potentially do. And so if you have, those workplace relationships that we talked about last week, um, you might feel more likely to be impacted by these normative social influences if you want to fit in with a group that you like. And if you start sort of pairing that influence with pro-social behavior, or or you talk about climate ergonomics, Barry, that's something that you're passionate about. And so pairing that normative social influence with like pro-social behaviors like recycling. If you see your friends doing it and they recycle, you will be more likely to recycle to fit in with that group. If they are taking their bikes to work, you're going to feel more inclined to take your bike to work too, because that is something that you can relate to them with. And so likewise, if you foster an environment of productivity, I think this is where, when we talk about human performance, we can really make that human factors connection here. If you foster an environment of productivity in the workplace and healthy work-life balance, I think that has a huge impact on human factors. So I just wanted to highlight that because I think it's so critical for that human factors connection that maybe wasn't apparent at the top when we started this news story.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's talk about social influence, because this is kind of that other piece of the puzzle, right? This can take this can manifest itself in many different forms. And we've been talking about conformity, and that's kind of the big one here. So conformity at its base is when somebody adopts the opinions or behaviors of another person or another groups. This often occurs in groups, and it usually happens when an individual conforms to those social norms that are respected by everybody in that group. Right? We talked just about that normative social influence. I think this is really getting at that. Right? There are other things that are not behavioral that are also adopted. So they might conform as well to opinions and values, which will impact behaviors, right? And they express support for some of these views accepted by the group, and sort of withhold the criticism they have about some of these views and opinions, right? And ultimately, um, this does come down to behavior. Like these withholding of criticism and supporting views will manifest itself in ways that uh, result in human behavior, right? They'll behave in a way that's similar to others in that group. I don't know. Anything to add to that, Barry, or do you want to jump into public versus private conformity, because there's quite a difference?
Yeah, before I jump into that, I think it's what that social influence and conformity is something we see a lot in the workplace, because of almost that that community of the workplace, and how you seem to fit in, what your perception of what your work behavior should be like, which might be very different to what you're doing at home. So it is quite an interesting one. Um, the public versus private conformity is super interesting for me, because it basically, when you look at when you conforming to the social norms of a group, a person may disagree with the opinions that they express or the actions that they take, but nonetheless they adopt a behavior that is expected of them. And this whole public versus private bit is actually, if you've got public conformity, it's involving matching your own behavior to meet the expectation of others, but whilst inside you might hold a different view. So the example that we've got here is a student may express a liking for a rock band because all of their friends listen to it. However, privately they may dislike the music, but they pretend to like it just to fit in with the group. Private conformity is actually when a person internalizes the views of a group and adopts that majority of opinion as their own. So, for instance, using the same idea, that the student listens to the music of the rock band that their friends like. Over time, they realize that they too enjoy this type of music. Their own personal opinion has changed. Private conformity has occurred. So that's really quite interesting about how you how you internally view and externally view everything that's going on around you. Which is, again, if we can influence people to, I mean, well, that's a key influencing measure about how to get people to not just talk about and pretend that they like what they're doing for you, but actually internalize it and make them actually feel like what they're doing. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a third kind of option here, which is identification. You talk about public, you talk about private. There's identification where an individual identifies kind of with other members of a group and conforms to their opinions and behaviors, and when they do that, they may seek to gain the favor of other members, and to be accepted in the group. So it's almost like uh, trying to change yourself to be in that group rather than being in a group by default and adapting to group think, right? So, for example, this might be an employee joining an office, right? We keep bringing up the workplace here. They might go bowling as colleagues, and they might like to go once a week. And I think we actually talked about actually going out
Mm.
as an example last week, but they go out to this bowling alley once a week, and privately, this person might dislike this pastime and prefer to spend it reading. I think we talked exactly about this when I was like, I just want to go to the hotel and like hang out.
Yes, I've had a good spot, yeah. So actually on that, having read them out like that, which is first time we've done that out sort of publicly, what's really the difference between that public versus private and that identification? They're largely the same thing.
Well, I think the difference when it comes to identification is sort of the wanting to be accepted into a group versus
Mhm.
the public conformity is you're already in a group. This is my understanding. I'm not an expert in this stuff, but public conformity kind of is like you're um, in a group by default, right? Like
Yeah. Yes, that's
identification is almost like I want to fit into this group,
how do I
and
get in there? Yeah, yeah. No, that makes
yeah.
sense.
Let's talk about internalization. You want to talk about internalization?
So internalization is another form of opinion conformity where the opinions of the group or minority within that group influences an individual's own options. The person may not only express the views of the group publicly, but also adopts these new views and regards them as being their own. So a form of private conformity. This internalization of new beliefs frequently occurs in religious groups, where members privately adopt the spiritual ideas expressed by authority figures as their own personal beliefs, which is obviously really interesting because we do have them. We've seen quite a lot of that at the moment around everything to do with COVID, everything to do with, I mean, particularly in the States, you've had interesting activities on
Interesting
the
is one way to put
frequency. And so, yeah, you can definitely see that sort of behavior occurring on a regular basis, can't you?
Yeah, internalization is basically the process by which those thoughts and opinions become your own when you're trying to conform to a group. And then the other piece of that is like compliance. This is kind of another form of conformity, which is when somebody requests something that maybe an individual or group um, they request something for that individual to do, right? It's instructions from another person. And unlike internalization, where you are slowly uh, adopting those opinions as your own, this doesn't necessarily require that private conformity. They actually might reluctantly comply in order to kind of fit in with the group. Um, and they might be privately doubting that request to do something, right? Uh, I feel like this is Fox News. Internally, they have a memo to be vaccinated. Um, that's their sort of I guess workplace mandate is they need to be
Mhm.
vaccinated, but they're sowing distrust
That's it.
um
Yes, it's true.
and so it's like I don't know. It's just a I don't know, weird. But I mean, compliance, right? When you think about complying with these uh, sort of requests, it frequently occurs when a person is asked by an authority figure. And so when you think about authority figures, you're thinking about hierarchical relationships most of the time, right? If you have some sort of person of authority, meaning your boss or um, a law enforcement officer or somebody who holds public office, any one of these roles, which is seen as authoritative figures, um, you might have I don't know, you might be more likely to comply to those, right? You might have drivers complying with the directions given by traffic wardens because they have authority over traffic. And students comply with the requests of their teachers, who also have a position of authority in the classroom. That's very different from obedience. So compliance is sort of I guess let's talk about the difference. You want to talk about obedience, then we can talk about the difference between them too.
Yeah, so obedience is similar to compliance in that you basically getting people to do as they're told. In the fact the person modifies their behavior to obey the directions of another, often with positions of authority, but it doesn't actually require the subject to alter his or her own private opinion. Where we see this is largely in hierarchical organizations, such as, I mean, the military is a really good example where, because you're in that hierarchy and it's an autocratic organization, you get told what to do, you get given an order, you carry it out. That is that obedience, which for me is different to the compliance, because the compliance, you may not actually know the person who's given you the direction or the order, but because you respect the position that they're in, and it could be just probably more of a one-off event, you will do it because of the social norms around complying with what you're doing. Whereas the obedience is doing it on a much more repetitive, and you will repeatedly do it. Do you have a
Good
different
save.
take on that?
No. Good save. I brought up hierarchical and compliance, and I was wrong.
Well, I
But
didn't I
yeah,
didn't like to say that in public, but
yeah, I'm calling myself out there. I didn't want anyone else to call me out on Twitter or anything. So yeah, you're right. I think there's a distinct difference. One is because somebody holds a position of authority, and the other is because there is a hierarchical relationship. Compliance versus obedience. And when you talk about that hierarchical relationship, there's also sort of social roles, right?
Mm,
It's different in the sense that there are roles in which people find themselves, and this could be a human factors application here too, right? If you think about the way in which people perform, you talk about human factors practitioner. What does that role do at work? You talk about a UX designer versus UX researcher. What are the differences in those roles? And so if you think about sort of assigning each of these roles with a set of attitudes and behaviors with those roles or responsibilities, even if you're thinking about workplace, right? And the role that that person has to do, or the things that that person has to do in that role, it can influence their actions and opinions, right? They might ultimately, as like let's say someone's a designer and they slowly start to think more like a designer because they're in that role and they're getting more experience with those types of things. Likewise, if you're in a research role, you might start thinking about research differently and interacting with other researchers and trying to do that. And if you're a human factors practitioner, who the hell knows what that is? Like really. So
fair comment.
you have these roles, but that when we talk about them in a social sense, you can think about being influenced by a number of different roles at one time, right? You wear many different hats. You're a dad, you're a brother, uh you're I don't know, a son, you're a worker, you are a you name it, right? And
Mm.
so um you play a professional role, you play your profession, and that's associated with different types of behavior. So for example, right, you people expect a doctor or a naval office to be a little bit more serious than a circus entertainer. It's not always true, but but you might try to fulfill this assumption when you are given that role. If your idea of a doctor is serious, then you might, if you are pursuing a medical degree, slowly become less fun. And throwing shade on doctors here. I'm just kidding. But
He's not kidding at all.
but I mean,
Uh,
there's other types of roles as well too, right? We all know gender roles, family roles, different societal roles. Those can also influence behavior. And this is like classic Zimbardo. Um, if you think back to Psych 101 and the prison experiment, this,
mm.
assigning people to roles, and they kind of perform it. Do you want to talk about minority influence?
Yeah, so while conformity usually occurs in response to the vast majority of a group coming together and influencing other members, individuals or minorities of group can also exhibit social influence. So this occurs when individuals present an opinion that is different to what is held by the majority. So as this opinion is novel and contrary to the group norms, the attention of the other members is drawn to it, and they are led to then consider the merits of the minority opinion. Because it runs against the accepted beliefs of the group, it cannot rely on normative influence to lead the other members to comply. Individually tend towards a majority held view, to feel as though they're part of a group. but this minority view usually needs to exert informative influence by presenting new information, maybe a key fact or a key bit of knowledge, as having been overlooked by the majority. A minority can persuade other members to reconsider their opinion. This is known as conversion. If minority influence is able to convert a significant number of people or a sufficient number of members within the group, it will become the majority opinion within the group. So many social and political movements, such as the civil rights movement in the US, and use minority influence to change the views of the wider population. So that's something you see quite a lot, as it states in the political domain, where you go out and try and convert people, almost that one at a time approach, to get your minority view to be taken to be by the majority, which is
Yeah.
quite cool.
Yeah. So and then you have Cialdini, who
Mhm.
is like king of influence, or well-known name. The
Yeah.
principles of influence. There's several different principles. We can kind of go through back and forth one by one, but we'll start with like reciprocity, right? And these are other ways to kind of think about influence, right? So reciprocity, you're basically more inclined to give back when people give something to you. So think about like a gift or a certain behavior or service, right? I mean, there's been studies that have, you send a Christmas card with $20 to somebody, and they'll send you one back without even knowing
Mhm.
you, with money in it, because they must have just forgot about you and they feel bad.
Yeah.
It's rather remarkable thing, the reciprocity thing. So I mean, when you think about influence, what's up next?
So scarcity is basically around if you try and make out that something isn't going to exist anymore, so there's going to be less of something, then people want more of it, and it's quite a typical technique used by stores and stuff like that to say you see so many sales of end of line sales and all that sort of stuff. As soon as people think they're not going to get something anymore, then suddenly demand for everything shoots through the roof, and so telling people that something's going to become scarce is a key driver to getting people to want it. Do you want to talk about authority?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about compliance and obedience. This is really kind of that encapsulated in authority, right? It's people follow the lead of credible, knowledgeable experts, or those that are in hierarchical roles from them, that have that authority to do something.
Mhm. But then also there's this idea of consistency. So people like to do stuff that they've already done. So if you're agreeing with getting people to agree with what they've already done, you can point out that, say somebody gives to charity, and you want them to give to your charity, you can use that to say, well, you give to that other charity, so you're clearly charitable, so give to our charity as well, or anything like that. So if you can get them to continue the behavior that they've already had, you can turn that to your advantage.
Yeah. Then there's liking. You're more likely to say yes to people that you like, so be
Hmm.
likable.
It works. And social proof, we've already talked about social proof in quite a lot of detail, but that idea of you want to be part of the group, you want to, if somebody else is doing something, you want to generally go along for the ride and follow what everybody else is doing. And
Yeah,
then do
and
you want to hit the other one?
lastly is unity. Us versus them. This is political parties. This is different groups that you feel like there's another group kind of opposing you. You need to be united in your thoughts. And so that's kind of the last one here for principles of influence. Now let's wrap up. That's influence 101, folks. That's
Mhm.
social psychology. Let's talk about this in relation to the article and human factors in general. And I think there's some really interesting discussion to be had here, potentially around sort of the way in which they measured this, right? So they've been using a computer based game for this. Um, Again, to remind everybody, since we've kind of gone so far from the original article, uh, basically we're talking about how our minds are distinguishing from various social influences. So all these different social influences that we just talked about, our minds are distinguishing uh, from them, or between them, through uh, through our brain. My brain is clearly not working tonight. So what they did is they did this computer based game where the participants had to try and remember the position of a dot displayed on the screen. They gave confidence values for their answers. However, if they were allowed to revise their guesses, they had seen the answer of a computer or a virtual partner with whom they'd been introduced to before the experiment. In reality, all answers were provided by computers. So they only, manipulated whether or not the person thought it was a person or a computer. Um, and that really produced some interesting outcomes here, right? Because we're talking about the differences between working with humans and versus working with computers, and there's kind of huge human factors applications here.
Yeah, no, there absolutely is, because certainly when we're doing a lot more work around AI, machine learning, and things like that, we're getting more and more systems that are going to be providing guidance to us as humans. And the one of the good drawouts of this, or one of the interesting drawouts, is that if somebody was going to make a decision, they had that low set of confidence. If they thought that the bit of advice being given to them was by a human, then they'd more likely match that advice if they weren't really confident in what they were doing. If they thought that it was being given by a computer, then they'll be less likely to change their minds, because they assume that they know better. So, but as you said, the actual at the baseline, all the answers were being given by computers, so you could really see that draw itself out. So if we're doing a lot more work around AI systems, even everything from Alexa and Google Home and all things like that, all the way through to some of the futuristic AI systems, if we're going to have that sort of relationship with them AI systems, and we're just not going to trust them, and we're automatically going to override them, is that going to make them sort of systems basically less trusted overall? Are they going to have the impact that we truly think that they should have? And so how we deal with that from a human factors perspective is going to be quite key, because we've got to make sure that we present that information in the right way, that the advice, because it will be advice or it will be guidance or whatever, will be taken in the way that we intended.
Yeah, and I mean, you could always you could always tell somebody that they are talking with a human to I don't know, help with that trust, right? We're talking about trust in human robot AI teaming here. And so there's going to be a what I see is a bunch of ethical questions of when do you tell somebody that it is a robot versus when do you tell somebody it's a human, if that robot is going to, or that AI is going to give you a much more accurate assessment of the situation, especially in like the military domain, right? I can imagine this would be a very tricky needle to thread. You also have sort of situations where it's less stakes are less high, something like chatbots.
Hmm.
Do you tell the person that it is a chatbot or not? Because if you do tell them it's a chatbot, they're going to be less likely to trust their answer. They're going to click through to get to a real human. Or do you say, fake it? I see it sometimes like, hey, my name is John and I'm here to help you. What can I help you with today? And it's so obvious that it's a chatbot, but it's like one of those things is, how do you design around making it feel like a human, but still being ethical about it? I don't know. It's a huge. We're not going to solve it here today on Human Factors Cast. I'm sorry if you tuned in for that, but
Though on that point, if you want to read more into that, there is a book called Virtual Humans by David Burden that is all about that, the development of chatbots and things like putting chatbots through the Turing test and things like that, which is thoroughly interesting and thoroughly recommended.
right, it'd be very
So,
interesting to see where social influence falls with computers that pass the Turing test and those that don't.
mhm,
Um, and telling them they're all robots, but then kind of the ones that do pass the Turing test, you're like, is that really a robot? I don't.
yeah.
It's one of those things where we just don't know yet. Um, I think we're close, but we just don't know yet. Any other closing thoughts on this article or
Um,
social influence?
yeah, I think it's interesting. Like I said, I think it's another foundation article, foundation building block for us to work on. I think the true value for me is that bit in the difference between how we take AI, how we take influence from people, and the difference between the two. And it'll be interesting to see what they go on and study next. What about you? Have you any final thoughts?
This was a struggle. I mean, look, well, I do post these. I'm the one who goes through, so I
So
guess it's
this is
on me.
all your own fault.
But like I'm really thankful we did it because it was an exercise for us to stretch and to really think about this from a human factors perspective. I knew when I saw it, it was human
Mm,
factors. It's one of those things. It's like, what is art? Well, I know it when I'll see it. And so for me, this was human factors in the sense that it has some underlying mechanisms that will contribute to human factors discussion. It in itself is not human factors. And so I always appreciate the ones that make us stretch far to get to that human factors application because really, human factors is everything when you think about it.
absolutely.
So I may have pulled this story, but thank you to our patrons and everyone on Twitter who voted for selecting our topic this week, and thank you to our friends over at Ludwig Maximilian's University for our news story this week. If you want to follow along, we do post links to the original articles and our weekly roundups on our blog. You can also join us on Discord for more discussion on these stories. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back to see what's going on in the human factors community right after this.
Human Factors Cast brings you the best in human factors news, interviews, conference coverage, and overall fun conversations into each and every episode we produce. But we can't do it without you. The Human Factors Cast network is 100% listener supported. All the funds that go into running the show come from our listeners. Our patrons are our priority, and we want to ensure we're giving back to you for supporting us. Pledges start at just $1 per month and include rewards like access to our weekly Q&As with the hosts, personalized professional reviews, and Human Factors Minute, a Patreon-only weekly podcast where the hosts break down unique, obscure, and interesting human factors topics in just 1 minute. Patreon rewards are always evolving, so stop by patreon.com/humanfactorscast to see what support level may be right for you. Thank you, and remember, it depends.
Huge thank you, as always, to our patrons. Especially want to thank our honorary Human Factors Cast staff patrons, Michelle Tripp. Patrons like you keep the show going. Thank you so much for your continued support. I don't think I've mentioned this in a while. I'm trying to figure out which one I talk about. Let's talk about the website. We have a website. It's pretty awesome. Go check it out. humanfactorscast.media. You can do a lot of things there. And we have all sorts of fun things over there too. We got detailed show notes with, links to any guests that might have been here on the show that week, as well as embedded YouTube videos. So you can, again, see how handsome Mr. Barry Kirby is when he's got COVID. He's incredibly handsome. Especially if you're regularly an audio listener. We do have weekly news roundups most of the time. This week we didn't have one, but most weeks we do. So you can check those out for stories that didn't make the cut. There's also ways to submit your own stories. So if you're working on something interesting that you think it would be a great thing for us to talk about on the show, there's a submit button in the show notes. You can also search our episodes. If you are looking for specific content, you want to know what's going on with influencing, you can search that and it will return every episode where we mention that. We also have conference recaps up there. And if it's been a minute since you've checked out the website, just go take a look. It's humanfactorscast.media. All right. With that, I think it's time that we get into this next part of the show we like to call...
It came from...
Yes, we're switching gears. We're getting to It Came From. This week it's all Reddit, but I think this is we got some good ones this week. This is the part of the show where we search all over the internet to bring you topics the community are talking about. Community is talking about. Grammar. If you find these answers useful, give us a like to help other people find this content wherever you're listening, watching, all that stuff. So we got 3 today. Let's take this first one here. This is, how do you approach prioritization for a product that is very broken? What techniques would you use to find the severe issues? This is by ChickenCrawlCrew on the user experience subreddit. They go on to write, let's say you've identified that in your online store, the search is the most important experience and everything is broken. Search filters don't work or act as expected. It's bloated. The UX is absolutely horrible. categories make no sense. Naming of features make no sense. Selecting a feature shows results, but the results don't seem to contain the thing you selected. How do you identify all issues, technical and design, and prioritize them best? Anything besides doing a heuristic review? Barry, how would you approach this situation?
I'd start again by the sounds of it. I think there is, I mean, almost seriously on that point, there is certain times when if you've got something like that, and that just sounds like a horror story, that sometimes it's easy to just start again, go and work out, right, what is your, if it's not meeting what you expect in terms of a user experience, what is the user experience? Go back to basics in terms of what are your user stories, and the workflows that you're expecting, and start it through again. The other one I quite like to use to justify that, I guess, is like things like cognitive walkthrough, that type of approach of, again, it's just going through, right, what is it you're expecting, detail it, and but just from that, I would rip it to bits and start again, because I quite like doing that sort of thing. What about you, Nick? How would you? I'm sure you'd take a much more considered approach to just a
Uh,
big habit.
I don't know. I think the tear it down and try it again is a good approach, but let's say you don't have that option, right? I think there are some clever ways to sort of suggest a major overhaul with some simple tricks. Uh, PMs hate this one simple trick. So like what I would do is I would sit down some users and really talk about, um, do kind of a card sorting exercise of features, right? What is the most, what is the thing that you need, um, to be 100%, and kind of have them sort by that way. And that way you have some sort of indication of priority for what's important to the users, right? Search is a whole thing. And yes, it's broken, but are you going to fix the results first because that's what they're most interested in? Are you going to do filters first because they need to be able to have that functionality and that might result in better results? It really comes down to, what the search is intended to do for your product, because search could be broken, but what if it's like a very minor part of your other product, like your whole product? What if your product is mostly controls, and really search is for like minor things like settings? It doesn't make sense to do a whole overhaul for something like that. So really, how big is the problem in relation to the rest of the product? And then understanding what, um, sort of requirements are needed from the user perspective, right? I think that's kind of a conservative approach to, maybe not tear down the whole thing and start over.
Yeah, I don't. Part of me says that if something, I mean, because they've said everything is broken. Part of me says that would I go out to users at that point? Should I not be able to pull in from either my own experiences, or at least be able to, if it's a store, then one of the things I've got to be able to do is sell something. I'm going to be able to see what I'm going to be able to sell. I should be able to at least hit the top three things that need to be working out of an online store. That that isn't rocket science.
No,
Um,
yeah.
and getting that work, but it depends what they mean by, my version of everything is broken is possibly less dramatic than what their version of on everything is broken. If it's truly broken, I'm an engineer, hit it with a hammer. But if it is a bit more nuanced than that, then I think you should be able to rely on your skills as an HF practitioner. But then, yes, if it's much more nuanced, then bring users in and do that. It depends on, yes, severity, I
Uh,
guess.
oh, it depends. Are you telling me that something
Oh,
in
yeah,
human factors depends? Yeah,
and
like, look.
I didn't even cue that up. Didn't think
No, you
about that.
didn't. Look, it,
Yeah.
it really does, right? How severe is the product? You say it's very broken, everything is broken, but really, what is salvageable from it? And you should know, like you said, Barry, like what the top couple issues are. I think you could go out if it makes sense to do. I don't know. I was talking about generally, right? I wasn't
Yeah,
talking
yeah,
about
yeah,
search.
yeah,
Anyway,
yeah.
let's go into this next one here. This is feeling very overwhelmed with my new job. This is by MangoStrudel on the user experience subreddit. I just landed a job as the only designer, or we can say human factors engineer or UX researcher, or whatever it is. It's all applicable at a startup because I had 5 years of experience working as the sole designer for startups. I am 2 days in, and I realize that being the only designer at all times has created bad habits in me. My methods are not as clean, and it's the first time that I have someone in the company, my direct boss and CTO, who have some level of experience in Figma. To be honest, he knows more than me. Just isn't as experienced with the visual design. I feel like I can't fake it till I make it here. Like in all the other jobs I had so far, the fact that this is on an entirely new subject matter, AI, isn't helping me either. Since today's 3-hour meeting, I understood almost nothing. I'm working from home today and I am having panic attacks constantly. Will this get better? Am I in over my head? Too long didn't read. Am I panicking about a new job? Barry, have you been in this situation? And
Yes,
what do you
yes.
recommend?
I was in this situation last week. So literally, I've started a new project, and it's in a subject area that I know a bit about, but not a vast amount about. I know my role in it exceptionally well because it's got about human factors integration, but the actual subject of it is something I haven't touched on since university, and so from that perspective, I'm about 20 odd years out of date. So yeah, I completely get where you're coming from. The what I would say is that you've joined a team, and they wouldn't have hired you if they didn't see the skills that you had, because presumably they asked you if you've had skills, and you told them you had some skills, and, and probably in this sort of role, you probably demonstrated some sort of skills as well. And me, COVID. Um, so trust them to a certain extent that they've hired you. They might have some more experience, like saying in Figma or any other tool that doesn't really matter. And but you've said yourself they don't have the same experience as you in visual design. So go with it. That's your role in the team. Bring that visual design to the team, and if you lean on them to learn more about Figma from them, if they've got more experience, that's fabulous. Crack on. Um, you're only a couple of days in. Whenever you start a new project, even if it's not with a new company, it's the same company, or whatever. When you start a new project, you are learning new stuff all of the time. You will feel swamped, but don't panic. It will all become fine. If you're still feeling like this in sort of 6 months' time, that's when you start asking the questions. But for a couple of days into a job, I mean, have you learned how to fill out your timesheet yet? Because no
Right.
doubt there will be a new system for that. And let's face it, most companies, that's the most important thing. So yeah, I think just don't stop panicking, breathe, and realize that they've hired you because of your skills, not because the skills that they've already got. You're bringing something new to the table.
Yep, you took my answer, Barry. They hired you for a
Yay.
reason. I think what you're experiencing here is imposter syndrome, and I mean, you are overwhelmed because yes, it's a new domain. I know a lot of people who work in contracting where, like you said, Barry, you might get introduced to a new contract that is a completely different domain, and it's your job to understand, but not on day three.
Hmm.
Not on day three. You don't need to understand everything about artificial intelligence on day three. Take your time and learn. They expect it. Um, I just switched domains recently too, and I am still completely lost, and that's okay, right? It's going to take me time to understand. I I feel a little nervous about not knowing, but then it's okay. Imposter syndrome is a real thing as long as you're not um as long as you can do the job, and if you can't communicate that, you need a little bit more information or time or whatever it is. I don't know. I don't see this as yeah, like you said, Barry, 6 months, maybe, but 3 days, nah.
I mean, let's face it, learning about AI is a day 5 thing, not a day 3 thing.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. 3 hour
and if you
meeting
want
is like definitely not a first week thing. I don't know.
to, And if you want to talk about imposter syndrome, then we'll talk about that in a couple of weeks. But
Yep. All right. Last one up here. Barry, you chose this one because it's very controversial. This one is paper prototyping is the biggest waste of time ever. This is from the user experience subreddit. This is hi, I'm from Uranus or Uranus, depending on how you read it. Anyway, so they go on to write, so I'm working on an apt concept and I wanted to try paper prototyping just for fun. So the first thing is I needed paper, pen, and scissors, but I don't have any scissors on hand. So I had to spend some time just finding a scissor. And having the tools I needed, then it was over to drawing. I started by drawing up some iPhone mock-ups. I figured I could start with 10. I started to draw some user flows. I'm not going to read this whole thing. After drawing some mock-ups, I realized I wanted to change a button placement. Now I have to do everything all over. After drawing up all the screens for a very specific user flow, I had to spend some time cutting out all the mock-ups. Then user testing, switching out a screen for another takes so much time that users lost context with what they were doing. I also realized that my handwriting were more sloppy than I thought, so I spent 10 times the time with paper prototyping compared to creating a low fidelity prototype in Figma. And the whole experience sucked for everyone, and I got nothing out of it. Barry, do you feel that paper prototyping is the biggest waste of time ever?
I can see from their story why they would think that. However, just think yourself lucky that you're able to use something like a tool like Figma in order to do it. What I would suggest is, having worked in defense for quite a while, there are times when you just can't use fancy new cool tools, and and this isn't just mocking things up. This could be trials. This could be anything. Pen and paper. You've got to be able to rock it back to pen and paper. However, what I would say in the description as well is of Nick, of what you read out, was it seems maybe they've gone too in depth on their paper mock-ups. Paper mock-ups should be there. They should be relatively lightweight. They should be fun. And actually, if you're drawing everything out, actually you're missing half the fun, because half the fun there is getting the users themselves to draw them out. And because if you're doing it as part of a that session, then you don't just get the users to test it, but you can actually get them to do some of the work as well. So yeah, I think there are tools out there that you can use, as you said, Figma. There's others, but that make it seem a lot quicker. But sometimes just going back to pen and paper is just the thing to do. Maybe I'm just getting old. I don't know.
No, I mean, I've been in the same situation. You need to take pen and paper into secure locations where you can't have access to fun, fancy tools. The thing that I have issues, I hate to call people out, but this post is frustrating for a variety of reasons. I'm the sentence, I wanted to try paper prototyping just for fun. Why would you not plan it? Why would you just in the moment decide to do it and then get frustrated when you don't have the materials to do so? It requires planning, it requires thought, and the fact that just on a whim, I'm going to try this. And then the fact that you're drawing the mock-ups, in a certain fidelity, and the fact that you're drawing them with a button placed on the layout already, that is part of the issue. You draw that out separately so that way you can move it around on the overall layout. It's just, this is very frustrating to me, Barry. I think that the advice that you've given is very good. This is a situation where you need to be better prepared, and it is a tool in the toolbox. And if it's more efficient for you or the right tool for the job, then do it. But if you are better at creating low fidelity mockups in Figma, then do that. I don't know. I have a whole lot of problems with. I hate calling people out, but this post is just so frustrating.
No, it does, and I was going to sort of wrap up with some of them bits around. If you're sat there going, right, we've got a prototyping session today. Right, it's going to start in half an hour. I know, we're going to do pen and paper as well. So and then you've got to do all that prep work. Well, yeah, of course it's going to suck. If you do an iPhone mockups, why sit there and draw out iPhone mockups? One iPhone mockup, photocopier, done. And if you're doing them bits, and like you say, then you're printing out your objects, your artifacts, or that's what you move around, you draw on. I think you've maybe read the book but not swallowed the lesson, possibly. And yeah, you need to use the right tool for the right job, and all of that.
Yeah,
but it's fun. I quite like the contentious ones.
So not controversial at all in our mind. All right, let's just move on. This one needs no introduction. It's one more thing. Barry, what is your one more thing this week?
So in interesting and exciting news, we're going to buy an electric vehicle. I say buy. We're going to lease an electric vehicle because they're way too expensive.
With all that Patreon money.
Yeah, well, it's the Patreon and the coffee money. You know, it's finally all come in, and hey, great! I can't wait. If only. But no, so we buying an EV, which is or going to lease an EV, which is very, very exciting, and there's loads of stuff around that. But the one thing I've got, I don't know whether this applies in the same way in the States, but there is, when we first started talking about EVs, there was sort of one main network for charging, and you know, you just rock up and there was a plug it in the car. I mean, how hard can that be, really? But of course, now as they become more popular, there's more, you know, there's no such thing as free electricity anymore. But, you know, the different network, the different people who own the chargers obviously want to make some money back, because you're basically taking their electricity. And so now there seems to be a whole bunch of different network providers in the area that I live in, South Wales. There seems to be about 10 or 15 different electricity network car charging networks that you will need a different card for, and all this sort of stuff. So the complexity of this new of EV buying now doesn't seem to be about range and stuff like that, because, you know, that's getting better. But it's, I'm going to need to walk around with a whole flexi wallet full of about 20 or 30 RFID cards just to be able to use the chargers that I might need to use on longer journeys. There's got to be a solution here. There really has to. So I think I'm at that nervous, tentative point where I don't know quite how it's going to work. I don't know quite. I know it's going to involve a lot of change of behavior, and change in attitude. And because it's the first time I've ever owned a brand new car, and not wanting to scratch it, things like that. So it's quite an exciting time, but also quite scary as well.
Here's what you do. You have a separate wallet that you just keep in your car that's just EV cards. And you have your other wallet that you carry with you everywhere. And whenever you go to an EV charging station, you just take out that wallet, pay, and then, you know, leave it in there.
And we have to sign up to all of these different networks to make it happen. And so I've got to work out where they all are, what they do, and all that sort of stuff. Apparently, most of them will take contactless now.
Yeah, well, make a
Which helps,
spreadsheet,
but-
and then
well,
you know,
that's a fun bit. And a bit of a map and all this sort of
yeah,
stuff. But
a spreadsheet, a map, pull it up on your Tesla dashboard, and call it done. You're
not getting
not a Tesla, not a
not
Tesla.
a Tesla.
Ooh.
So yeah, well, apparently other EVs do exist.
Oh wow,
Who knew?
interesting, fascinating.
Yes. What about you?
Yeah, okay. You're ready for dorky. So my one more thing this week, it's going to be a little bit of a show and tell, so I'll try to describe it best I can for the audio listeners. I bought an adjustable gooseneck phone clip. Now, what this means, we're going to get a little dorky here for a second. What this actually means is that it's a device that you put around your neck, and it
Oh
has a
my
magnetic clip in the
God.
front, and now I can look at my phone or whatever I want. It's a perfect time to freeze too.
I was going to say, that's perfect. But so to describe the scene, Nick's got this what looks like a collar on with a magnetic thing in the front of it, but the camera has frozen. In fact, now the camera is now crashed out. That's absolute
camera
genius.
crashed. So
Um,
you know,
even
this
the
is actually a
camera-
good exercise. This is actually a good exercise because I'll need to describe it for everyone. So yes, I have this like little gooseneck thing that goes around my neck, and it is effectively a phone holder that puts your phone out, you know, like 12 inches from your face, and you can like look at your stuff while you're laying down in bed or on the couch, and it's just right there in front of you. Or you can play games, you know, on a anyway. So I liked it so much that I got another one that clips on the top of my headboard and displays the phone right on top of my face while I'm like looking upwards, so I don't have to like crane my neck or anything. Pretty great, and would highly recommend it.
You know that thing that you're not meant to take your phone to bed with you?
Oh yes, I'm aware.
Okay, so now
Yeah,
you're just buying more things to enable that even more.
Yeah, what about it? What I mean, like, I don't know.
So
What?
you're not meant to take your phone to bed with you. You're meant to leave it downstairs, or in another room. I'm really bad at this, by the way, because it's got my alarm on it. And not look at it through the night, because if you look at it through the night, then just the light of it and it's sparking your brain into going means that it's going to do things and make you not sleep very well.
Yeah,
I've been
well, you know,
testing
there are some sacrifices that you make, and
That's true.
that is one of them. So
But
yeah,
does your gooseneck make you happy?
my gooseneck makes me happy.
Well, that's
And
all that matters then.
I will show more of it in the post show for those watching.
Oh, can't wait.
All right. Well, that's going to be it for today, everyone. If you like this episode and enjoy some of the discussion around influencing human behavior, we encourage you to go check out and listen to episode 208, where we talked about how work pandemic protocols influence human behavior, employee behavior. It's all the same. Comment wherever you're listening with what you think of the story this week. For more in-depth discussion, you can always reach out to us on our Discord community. You can visit our official website. Like I mentioned, it's a pretty cool resource. Sign up for our newsletter. Stay up to date with all the latest Human Factors news. If you like what you hear, you want to support the show, there's a couple things you can do. Leave us a 5-star review wherever you're listening, watching now. That is free for you to do. 2, you can tell your friends about us. Word of mouth really helps us grow. And we like that. A podcast growing is a sign of it's a good thing. And 3, consider supporting us on Patreon. If you have the funds to do so and want to support the show, you can certainly do it that way. We are putting that money to good use, I think. And as always, links to all of our socials and our website are in the description of this episode. Mr. Barry Kirby, thank you for being on the show today. Where can our listeners find you if they want to talk about what the story is next week?
You can find me on Twitter at Baz_K, or if you want to come listen to me witter on to guests and talk to some really interesting people, find me at 1202 Human Factors Podcast at 1202podcast.com.
As for me, I've been your host, Nick Roome. You can find me across social media at Nick_Roome. Thanks again for tuning into Human Factors Cast. Until next time,
It
it
depends.
depends.